All right, welcome back, everyone. I am walking around my home studio here with this device. This is called the SOMA Ether, and this is a really interesting device. So this is what has been called an anti-radio. It takes electromagnetic signals from all sorts of devices in my studio, including my iPhone here, this light, my computer screen, really anything that is magnetic rather, and it converts that into audio. And so what's interesting is that the radios that exist in the old days, we probably don't use radios so much anymore, but radios filter out the so-called unwanted electromagnetic frequencies in the world around us. So this particular device made my SOMA laboratories in Moscow, Russia, is very unique because it really wants to take advantage of those so-called unwanted frequencies and electromagnetic signals in our ambient environment and turn those into something perceptible, turn those into something that we can actually maybe learn from or use, as I often do with the SOMA Ether in my musical tracks. So I wanted to begin here, and I'm going to turn it off because this is a great introduction to the idea of technology that we'll be talking about today. So I specifically want to take you through a tour, if you will, of some issues of technology in our lives. I specifically want to talk about challenges and opportunities that exist given the myriad forms of technology that are around us. And as you might gather from my studio here, I have a slew of devices that I use, and I can't imagine what my life would be like if I didn't have all this audiovisual technology around me. I use it for my job, I use it for my musical pursuits on the side. Really everything I'm involved in everyday life focuses on technology, and hence this desire to talk today about technology in our lives. So what I'm going to be doing today, actually, I'm just going through some of my slides here. This is the title slide for our workshop, and this is part of the bigger LTCC, Lake Tahoe Community College Foundation student success grants that are really great opportunities for faculty out there to do some projects that can benefit our local community, benefit our teaching and learning, and of course benefit our students. In just a bit, I'll talk about the other workshops that we've had that have focused on technology from all these just different interesting angles, ranging from information literacy to using our technology in Canvas classes, and even things like technology related to on-the-job aspects, which I'm going to be talking about today as well. So I want to start with some issues, and then for each of these, I'll have a series of tips or key points that will, I think, guide or frame our conversations today. So the first is really to say that technology in our cultural worlds, I'm a cultural anthropologist, so a lot of this will be framed through the idea of cultural anthropology. A lot of us would say in cultural anthropology that technology acts as a two-edged sword. And this actually comes from the work of Dennis Goulet, who was a technologist, someone who focused on technology in everyday life. And he was really interested in this idea that technology has benefits and it also has disadvantages. So seeing it as a two-edged sword suggests the following, suggests that all this great musical technology around me can be used. All these cameras that I have here and lights and microphones and things like stream decks that allow me to, during a Zoom call, dial in different camera angles and to do cutaway scenes and to mute people and unmute people and so forth. All this kind of amazing technology around me allows me to do this very thing that I'm bringing to you now, which is this recording talking about technology from these different perspectives. At the same time, there are disadvantages. Obviously, this takes a lot of electricity. It costs a lot of money to buy this technology. Some people right now, for example, are very concerned about the environmental impacts of technology in our lives. Specifically, we have these NFTs, these non-fungible tokens, these entities that exist in the world that allow us to purchase art or to purchase even moments or memes, images or videos, and then maybe sell those or collect them or whatever. Well, a real concern is that because these often exist on the blockchain technology like cryptocurrency, is that it's taking a lot of power and a lot of resources and having a huge carbon impact on us in terms of just powering everything for these blockchain technologies to exist. And cryptocurrency right now is definitely something that people are concerned about. So the pros and the cons. So what I encourage you to do, if you think about technology in these more theoretical senses, is to really have some conversations with yourself about how technology can bring benefits to your life and also can bring serious disadvantages to your life. And I think one of the things we'll talk about today is how technology often creates inequality in our society. And so that's one of the big themes that we'll be talking about today as we connect technology to social justice. So kind of as a summary tip here, we can remember that technology creates and destroys. So when you think about it in your own life, when you think about how it operates in your own frames of life, as I'll be talking about throughout this talk, I really encourage you to think of the pros and the cons, the negatives and the positives about technology. It's neither one or the other. I sometimes hear people say like online classes or Zoom workshops are bad. I don't think they're bad or good. And in some ways, understanding technology and studying it from a social scientific perspective allows us maybe to see technology in some ambiguous ways. And there might be some ambiguity that guides us in our conversations about technology today. Let me talk about the other grants and workshops that are available. And what's cool about this is all being turned into a Canvas Commons resource. So if you're a student and you're watching this, you have the opportunity to take advantage of this and to go in and really look at some of these workshops and maybe use them as part of your ability to become more aware about technology, to develop technological awareness and some of these other issues that we'll be talking about today. So I just want to begin by summarizing what this grant is all about. Again, if you're a faculty member and you want to do more with one of these grants, reach out to the foundation, to Nancy Harrison, and get more information. It's a great opportunity. So the aim of this particular program, which is called the Coyote Student Technology Scholars, is to provide students with technological literacy to develop skills and technology needed in online learning at our college, as well as in career and college transfer requirements. CSTS has focused on a seed project that, if institutionalized, could result in long-term and ongoing focus on student technological literacy at the college. And if you want it kind of in a nutshell, the outcomes of the project have included a series of things we focused on. So doing these workshops, inviting people, students and faculty to attend the workshops, creating these videos that allow you to watch all this information after the fact. We've also had some drawings for student gift cards for the LTCC bookstore. So that allows students to take advantage of technological purchases if they need it or anything else from the LTCC bookstore. And then I will work on a Canvas Commons student suite that will allow you as students and faculty to use these resources in your classes, including the videos and links and everything we've been talking about. So in short, we're helping LTCC students with technology and technology literacy. And this is a good opportunity to talk about technology literacy. So technological literacy refers to this idea that to do anything in our everyday lives, we really have to have knowledge and training and workshopping to understand the technology that we're working with. So for anything I work with, whether it's Canva here, a program online, or if I'm working with Final Cut Pro, which is a program that allows me to take any number of video clips. In fact, this is some of the stuff I've been working on for this very video you're watching. So it has titles, it has these cutaway screens, and then once this video here is recorded from my 2 cameras and my audio source, I put this all inside this program, and then that allows me to create this cool, spiffy video. So one of the things that's really great about technology is it frees you up. It allows you to do things you couldn't do without the technology specific to the task you're doing. At the same time, it creates challenges. There's learning. It takes hours, sometimes days, weeks, months, years to learn some of this technology. So one of the big tips out there is to really make sure, we'll talk about this connected to your careers and so forth later, is to make sure if you're a student to really stay on top of technological literacy. Depending on the field that you're in, if you go into music technology or recording, or if you go into cultural anthropology or sociology, each of those disciplines and fields will have different requirements that you will have to then learn some of this technology and kind of adapt to it as it's emerging in your life. So staying on top of the technology as we connect this to technological literacy is definitely a key for all of us to think about. So I've mentioned some of these other workshops that have taken place. All these videos will be available for you. I'm not going to go through all these, but I'll just give you a sense of the lay of the land and some of the workshops that we've had already. I've been super impressed with our presenters. We've just had so many great topics. This one here was by Amber Golagowski, Technology for the Working World. And in that video, she really covers a lot of great frames of understanding how you'll have to use technology as a student in your many career choices and career pathways that you might be engaging in the future. And then this is just a little more of that video, and this kind of just shows you what she talked about. And what's really cool about every one of these videos is they have all these great useful tips. This is about communication and how communication is an important part of technological literacy in the workplace. So as much as possible, I advise you to check out these videos because they are just really useful to understanding all these arenas of everyday life, careers, LTCC classes. In this case, Michael Miguel, our Director of Online Learning, presented for faculty on how to use the Canvas app. And specifically, this is the app to use that allows you to navigate your classes, to do some grading and some simple features. So that was a good workshop. From anthropology, we had Jennifer Reynolds in March presenting on creating safe spaces of technology for our LTCC LGBTQIA+ students. This was such a great workshop. I mean, she covered so many different areas of how we can empower our students via online learning and technology, specifically our LGBTQIA+ students. And Jennifer just presented this with a lot of passion, and I just found that all the resources that she gave to us in this workshop will be making a difference. Even something like this, understanding what we mean by the term transgender or the term cisgender, is so important for faculty out there who are trying to really make more inclusive technological spaces for all their students, including their LGBTQIA+ students. So definitely recommend that video. We also had an LTCC Faculty Technology Summit. This was really cool back in February, and this grant has lasted really 6 months or so. So it's been a lot of work, and it's I think had a lot of great outcomes. So we had a lot of conversations here with LTCC faculty, and then we created a Jamboard here that allowed us to think very critically and creatively about the biggest technological needs of our students. And then what I do with all this is I pass this on to campus leaders. So Antonio Benitez can learn more about maybe what Promise needs in terms of technology. The college administration can learn more about some of these issues, access to computers and so forth. Josh and all the great folks in IT can stay on top of this and say, oh, well, there's a question here about access to software and then proficiency with software. So how do we train our students, our faculty, and our staff if we're using new software and we're trying to make sure that, again, we lessen barriers for our students here at LTCC. That was a really great workshop. We also did one with Melanie Aponte Chu on media literacy and critical thinking. And this one was really great because she focused extensively on how you as students can really think more critically about Googling, about using all the internet applications out there, making sure that you're not swayed in such a way that disinformation is kind of clouding your consciousness and your perspective as you think about issues in your classes, whether you're taking political science or math or any number of other classes. And so all of these videos are available on YouTube, on the ltccteachinglearning.com website. This next video was really, and workshop was really great. This was Sarah Pierce and Kato Goralski from our World Languages Department, and they specifically were focusing on how faculty can create classes that are welcoming for their students. And what was amazing about this workshop was just how carefully they took us through all their Canvas resources, their other apps that they use like Marco Polo, and really gave us opportunities to learn in real time from two pros here that are at the top of their game in terms of DE learning and DE teaching. So really, if you're a faculty member, you have to check out this video. It's definitely something that is worth your time. And the other cool thing that happened in doing that video was I created a making of video. And it was just a great opportunity as well to talk about technology and some of the technological hurdles that I have. And I'll probably include this in our final suite because it really gives you some insights about how I make these videos. For example, this is a shot here of trying to take everyone through my video program to really emphasize what goes into making a video. And that actually takes us back to some of the themes here, because certainly when we talk about things like technological literacy, we're getting into the arena of how technology has different social, cultural, and personal dimensions. And so when we talk about social, cultural, and personal dimensions of technology, I'm encouraging you, whether you're a faculty member, a staff member at the college, an administrator, a student, to really think more critically about technology. So again, anytime we use an application like any of these in my studio in our everyday lives, those have great potentials to transform us in personal senses, but there are social, cultural, economic, environmental concerns that we also have to bring to bear to the conversation about technology in our lives. So I really encourage you throughout our conversations about technology to think critically about technology, to really raise some concerns, to focus on social justice. Again, I could easily fall into like this technological utopianism where I think, well, because I have all this great technology around me, I'm absolutely satisfied and I love it. But what about the carbon footprint of all this? What about the cost of this technology? What about the access to the technology for people that do not have the ability to purchase some of that technology? And thus access, I think, continues to be one of the number one issues out there. So when we talk about technology, again, we just have to really think critically about it and not just assume that it's amazing and romanticize it or essentialize it. Now, next, I want to suggest something too. I was thinking about this recently, how you could chart these social, cultural, and political issues in your own life. So if I had a whiteboard, which I do here, the funny thing about a whiteboard, is that it's actually a form of technology. We don't think of it as such, but it's definitely a technology that we wouldn't think of maybe in the traditional sense. I think we don't think of a whiteboard with some pens as something that's remarkably technological, but of course, going back 50,000 years ago, focusing on our early human ancestors, we would be talking about stone tools, different devices that are used to transform the environment. And in a very simple sense, technology is about transformation. It's about harnessing resources, as we'll talk about in a little bit with the philosophical work of Heidegger. So one of the things you could do actually that might be useful, interesting, just from the perspective of thinking about technology critically, is you could sort of chart the uses of technology. And I'll show you what this is in a second as I write it. And what I'm going to suggest here actually is maybe like you would devise your own headers, and you're going to see what these look like in a second. Okay, so in other words, we could just, I sometimes do this in a class setting. So we could have this column here with the header be a form of technology. So I might pick the iPhone. I thought, because I'm talking about pros and cons, these could be pros and cons of the use of the iPhone. And then maybe a question I have specific to the iPhone that if I were a student studying this in a classroom setting for like a research paper, I could maybe use that question to frame an argument or a conversation. I hope that as students, you get to engage with technology in critical senses in your classes. And I hope as faculty that you'll be able to really focus critically on technology and its applications with your students as you're teaching them. So, a pro of the iPhone is sort of the, I'm going to write in here, the all-in-one device for life. So what this means is, I can use my phone as I'm using now to record a video. I can use it to navigate to the grocery store. I can use it to check my email, do all my social media posts and updates and so forth. Now, a negative is we could talk about the human rights abuses related to the production of the iPhone. say, in various low-paid factories in China or other parts of the world. So, with a lot of the technology we have to make it, quote, affordable, even though cell phones are very expensive to purchase, and then your cell phone plans can be upwards of $80 a month, they definitely bring into mind issues of technological inequality in terms of creating different standards where maybe people can't afford a phone, but they actually need a phone. I've heard of events or sporting events that you have to go into that only allow you to use an iPhone or a smartphone. So what's the cheapest smartphone out there? I mean, there are some lower cost opportunities there to buy a phone besides an iPhone, but it requires still a purchase plan, buying minutes and data and so forth. So very expensive. In a sense, we're keeping up with the fact that our society is requiring smartphones in everyday life. And of course, there's also this issue of planned obsolescence. We often see with automobiles, we see them with phones. So my wife and I actually purchased this new iPhone, 2 of them on a family plan, because we got a message from our carrier, from Sprint, saying we are discontinuing the old networks. You're now having to move to 5G. As a result of that, your phone will no longer work with the new 5G network. So we didn't have a choice. We call that technological or planned obsolescence. So even though your old device might work, the software changes, the firmware changes, and as a result of that, you have to buy a new device. So it creates real negatives, I would say, technology. We could add to more of these here in our chart that we should definitely talk about. And then what's a question I could ask about the iPhone? And maybe I could say, why is technological or planned obsolescence a part of our culture? It's kind of a curious one to think about waste and environmentalism. So maybe my framing question comes out of the con that I was thinking about here. So what I'd encourage you to do is, for any forms of technology out there, create a chart like this. And this could be an exercise for your students in a class. You can decide what you want as your column headers here, pros and cons, or you could specifically tie it to a form of technology and then maybe say what's an environmental impact of that technology, or what's a social impact, what's a cultural impact, to go back to my previous point that technology here has social, cultural, and personal dimensions. So I think this is kind of a cool idea. I'd be interested to see if you've done this or thought about it. I've actually done this in a few of my classes in the past. Okay, so the next focus here is on this idea of, taking charge of technology as it exists in our lives. And in just a second, I'm going to talk about kind of a philosophical perspective on technology. So in a sense, I'm going to contradict myself here, but I think it's very important, whether you're a student thinking about future career pathways or going to undergraduate school to get your BA or your BS, or going on to graduate school, to really take charge of technology. If you want to be successful in so many career pathways and educational pathways today, you have to learn the technology. It's not a choice, right? Oftentimes you are presented with a new form of software in a class, and someone will say you're taking a stats class or a psychology class. You have to use SPSX, and you're like, oh my God, this software is so foreign to me. I've never worked with it, and so forth. One of the best things you can do, and I do this all the time, is go to YouTube. And this is just kind of a pro tip out there, because when you go to YouTube and you can't figure out something, like in Final Cut Pro, I can type in Final Cut Pro and filters. And guess what? I'm going to find like hundreds of videos just about Final Cut Pro. So I could click on any of these, and then all these people are going to give me hands-on tips from their own perspective, working through the software. And what I love about using YouTube for this is they actually take you through the software in real time. So one aspect of taking charge of technology in your life is learning the technology. And I'll have to say, social media, and specifically YouTube, it's some of the best places to go in terms of learning about the technology that you're going to need in the workplace, that you're going to need in a new job, in a new career pathway. Now, I would add to that and say we really have to use technology in adaptive senses. And I think one of the things we sometimes get into is, like, you take a class or you're teaching a class and you're new to the technology. Whether you're teaching students or as a student, you're learning that technology for a final project or portfolio or something like that. So you say like, oh my God, I've got to learn so much about this technology. Well, what I say is just learn what you need to know, those bits, those chunks of information to get through your project. So to go back to my work with Final Cut Pro, if I am stuck on something doing Final Cut Pro and I'm trying to use, and this is again a video program, I'm trying to use maybe some filters and I don't exactly know how to drag these onto my clips and use them and so forth. Well, what I could do is very specifically type in Final Cut Pro filters and timeline. Get as specific as you can. Again, we're adapting here to the use of the technology, and then this will tell me a series of videos that I could look at to get more information about working with effects in Final Cut Pro, this specific form of technology. So as you use technology in adaptive senses, don't overwhelm yourself. Don't try to do everything with the technology. If you're using a program for a class or you're teaching a class to students, you don't have to learn everything about the technology or program. Likewise, use only the bits and things related to that technology, again in this adaptive sense, as you need those bits and pieces. You don't have to learn everything. If you're using your iPhone to record a lecture, just do the basics and, reach out to experts like myself to help you out with the technology. There are technology gurus around for you to learn from, whether those are student ambassadors or someone like me, the faculty chair of teaching and learning, to help you through the technology, because I literally live and breathe it in my everyday life. So it's one definite advantage as you adapt to new technology. Seek out the gurus in your life that can help you make the technology more adaptive to your own life circumstances, whatever those might be, in education or in your career. So the next area I want to focus on here is the idea of instrumental technology. This specifically comes from the work of a philosopher, Martin Heidegger. And Heidegger, by the way, is someone we should be very cautious of. He was connected to the National Socialists, the Nazis, during World War II, and suffered really great blemishes on his record in terms of being a great philosopher because of his unfortunate fall into darkness with the Nazis in Germany. So Heidegger, though, is important in terms of looking at technology. He specifically wrote an essay called A Question Concerning Technology, and he has some great anecdotes in this essay. I encourage any of you students or faculty to seek out this essay to learn more about like the philosophical aspects of technology. But he says something very interesting, that we often are using technology to harness the resources of the earth. So it could be something like we create a water wheel to harness moving waters coming down a stream or a river, and we turn that into power. We turn that into a way to power a grain mill or anything, a printing press, whatever it happens to be. So there's a certain instrumental side of technology that makes sense. If I want to capture electromagnetic waves in my ambient environment, I'm going to use something very instrumentally. So I'm going to go around and capture those waves and record it to my recorder. And of course, technology is instrumental. But it was a real concern of Heidegger because he feels like the other more artistic, aesthetic, or even relational aspects of technology to bring us together are lost in this focus solely on technology as something that can be used to harness the energy of the earth. And the other side of it, which makes it so ironic and sad that Heidegger was connected to the Nazis, because his philosophy was so anti-fascist in so many ways. But I think Heidegger was concerned that this focus on controlling and adapting and using nature was ultimately a destructive force in our being and our consciousness. And again, Heidegger was an existentialist as a philosopher. So I think a real concern I have is that this technology, as we were charting out here on my whiteboard, if it becomes instrumental, if we really need these iPhones, and the cost of the iPhone is that we're enslaving people in sweatshops and maquiladoras to make the iPhones in order for us to be able to, quote, afford them, then that suggests a very sinister side of this instrumental application of technology. So my encouragement for you today is to use technology in expressive senses, and I think this would satisfy Heidegger's requirement that we not focus just on the instrumental use of technology. So as a musician, if I use something like the SOMA ether to capture electromagnetic waves in my environment, I can turn this into a great musical piece. I can maybe perform that for people, and that also gets us back to using technology in a relational sense, in creating relations between people. And this really relates to our next area, and I'm calling this technology and access. So So I really want to encourage you, whether you're a student or faculty member or staff member, to think about technology in critical senses. Not everybody has access to the same kinds of technology. When we went into the pandemic teaching, a lot of us asked very hard questions about, can we hold students accountable for online learning, jumping onto Zoom and using Canvas if they don't have access to a computer, if they don't have a computer, if they can't afford Wi-Fi. So the college did, I think, a pretty remarkable job of setting up hotspots, giving out personal hotspots and Chromebook loaners to students, because if we're telling you that you have to take a class and interact with us on Zoom and Canvas, and you don't have a computer, you don't have Wi-Fi, what are you going to do? Are you going to sit outside Starbucks with your laptop and try to use the technology there? So it really raises concerns, technology does, about access, and I think we have to continue to ask critical questions. And then related to that, I want to encourage all of us to fight for social justice concerns connected to technology. So those of you that work in the arena of studying the environmental impacts of technology, you have to think about how all the stuff around us, all the carbon footprints that it makes. You have to think about the energy requirements. You have to think about the use of certain materials to create iPhones and so forth. If the byproducts of all these materials are hazards to our environment, again, going back to our chart, we need to really think about the negativities and the cons in terms of that use of technology, and maybe really raise some questions about whether we should continue to use it. So as much as I am an evangelist, as I'm a proponent for technology, as a cultural anthropologist and someone who has studied and written on the environment and social justice and social activism, I'll be the first person to tell you that we are in a potentially very downward slope in terms of the Anthropocene and what we call this era of negative human impact on the environment. So we have to really continue to focus on the idea of social justice as it connects to technology in all of these realms, including environmental concerns. So very recently, I was at a really interesting conference that actually focused on technology. This was a conference at UC Irvine on what was called multimodality. And specifically, this conference was trying to get anthropologists to think about the use of technology in new ways, taking their anthropological, what we call our ethnographic work, beyond writing text. And so I have some pictures here I was just trying to pull up on my Twitter page. This just gives you kind of a sense of the lay of the land here. I actually brought one of my Eurorack pieces of gear just back here and brought this to the conference because we were talking about how to expand anthropology into, say, realms of the sonic. This shows you the folks at the conference. We're still all masked up here at UC Irvine, and we had people that covered everything from audio technology to talking about film, documentary film, to doing things with climate justice that connected to technology in various ways. Stuart Candy from USC brought these really cool thing from the future cards, and this is something that relates to my point, and I'm asking us in this next area, using this conference as an inspiration. A tip here is to take charge of technology through anticipation. So Stuart Candy at USC is what's called a futurist, and he studies specifically context of the future. So the thing from the future cards are used in collaborative contexts to get people to try to think about issues of the future and challenges of the future. So the first thing you do is you choose an item, and these are kind of the red. There are three deck colors, green, red, and blue. And so you choose an item here. I'm trying to see if there's something that relates to technology. There's an invention. We can choose that. So the first card we might pick is there's an invention. And the second would be, what is that thing from the pink deck? What is it related to? So we could choose it's related to money. And then the third is the type of future in the green suit. And this could be in a recovering, in a hilarious, a creating, a noir, a playful, a queer future. I'll choose the queer future. So what you would then do is you take these three and you use these as prompts. So as you can see here, there is an invention related to money in a queer future. And so the idea is you would take the thing from the future, these cool cards, and use it to frame a conversation, not unlike the conversations here that we had at UC Irvine. So I really hope as you use technology in your life, you'll think about this anticipatory sense of technology. And very specifically, I think this requires us to think about what's coming next. So if we're teachers in our classrooms and we're anticipating the future, and let's say we shift to the metaverse, which is this Mark Zuckerberg sort of virtual immersive space that will happen via work and school and our everyday lives in this like virtual sense where we're all maybe wearing Oculus glasses. What's going to happen to our teaching in that framework, in that environment? So in a sense, you could do this for teaching. You could ask, in a futuristic world, just like Stuart's getting at with these cards, what will the metaverse mean in terms of technology? And you could start to chart that as well. And you could actually use this framework. So we could do that for teaching. I'm just kind of riffing off of Stuart's stuff here, which I find fascinating. So maybe for my first one, I'll show you this in a second. So you could almost use this as a planning chart. So focus more primarily on education. So in an educational context, there is maybe a new app for Canvas related to, we could say, teaching a biology in an uncertain or unequal future. And very specifically, I would think of Lake Tahoe and the gentrification going on, the poverty, the fact that no one, faculty, staff, students can afford to live in Tahoe is very scary just in terms of affecting how we teach, how we can even tell students to come to campus or live in the basin if it's that expensive. So kind of an anticipatory look at this might be because it's so expensive to live in Tahoe, we have to keep technology costs down. So we have to provide access to adequate Chromebooks or software that's free of charge via the Promise program or the foundation and some of these grants that we're working on. So what I learned from this conference at UC Irvine was like in multiple senses, pragmatic and theoretical and transformational and political. But working with these cards and getting these, and thank you to Stuart Candy for providing these free of charge, just really inspired me in this context to think of technology in this anticipatory sense. So again, anticipate what technology might look like in the future, and then use those social justice emphases we've been talking about throughout this workshop to think about how we can transform the lives of students or others who maybe don't have access to the kinds of technology that we have access to. Okay, the next concern I have today for us is technology in various frames of life. So what I mean by this is, how has technology transformed how we go about living our lives? So again, I love these whiteboards, the simplest form of technology. So you can start to chart some of the frames of life. So one thing could be relationships or dating. So for those of you who are, dating and active in that, and you use different forms of dating technology on your phones and stuff, you could definitely think about how technology has transformed, swipe left or swipe right on a lot of these dating apps, get you thinking that it's not just changing how you approach something in the frame of everyday life, but it's actually affecting your consciousness, to go back to Heidegger. Like the fact that we maybe think of, when we turn on our computer or phone, different startup sounds, or the way that we interact haptically with a phone when we touch it and it does something, we're transformed in those moments. We could also then put another frame on here of education, and we could add to that a second or third, work. So really think about how education has changed as a framework of everyday life given the uses of technology. Again, for better or for worse, to go back to Goulet's points about technology as a two-edged sword. It's neither the best thing or the worst thing ambiguously. It's in an ambivalent sense, maybe sense somewhere in the middle when we talk about the technology. Think about how it's transformed work. Think about people telecommuting nowadays. Think about all the requirements you have. If you're new to the job market or you've been out of the job market and you jump back on, all of a sudden you're like, I have to do a digital resume, and that's why you should check out Amber Golagowski's video on technology for the working world, and check out Melanie Chu's work on technological literacy, because of course having access to technology does not mean that the technology is always going to be beneficial to you. If it's information technology and it's full of lies or disinformation. I was mentioning recently that COVID really prompted us to think very critically about even people like the President of the United States telling people to stick tubes in their orifices, lights, and to drink bleach and stuff. I mean, it's just outrageous that someone like that is using the technological airwaves, if you will, to give people information that could end up killing them or severely harming them. So we're in maybe Orwellian times in terms of technology, because I didn't get into it in this, but if we talk about social media itself is having a very negative impact, a lot of us would say, on how we get information or how we meet people. If you've seen any of the videos on Netflix about scammers on various dating apps, I mean, it's really sad to see that millions of dollars are sometimes lost by these scammers that take advantage of people on applications, in the case of dating and relationships, that seem very wholesome and seem like great opportunities for people to meet others. So as you think about the frameworks in your own life, you can again begin to chart or understand how the technology requires you to do certain things, how the technology changes your framework, your understanding in the sociological sense, what we call the social construction of reality. It changes how you understand certain things about your life. So it could be dating. You start to think about dating via forms of technology. And as a result, you sometimes maybe lose out on some of the insights of the past and what relationships meant before people were swiping left and right on their phones, choosing someone that might be appropriate for them in a dating sense. So my tip on this is to really think about using technology in active senses, but then being very critical of those active senses as you think about the technology and its uses in these various frameworks that we've talked about, whether that's work, dating, relationships, even religion is one that I think would be very interesting to look at in terms of how technology has changed religion. And then our last one today is to talk a little bit about technology and consciousness. And this one I think is kind of interesting because it really gets us thinking, again, more philosophically, like with the work of Heidegger and his work in the question concerning technology, about to what extent this technology is changing us. Some people, like Ray Kurzweil, talk about this idea that eventually we will have complete adaptation of ourselves and our brains by merging and becoming cyborgs. We might have synthetic consciousness, and artificial intelligence is raising real concerns about whether the technology is going to get out of control. I think the idea of robots, of sentient robots in our own lifetime is not out of the question, and maybe not in our lifetimes, but in a few generations later. The idea of sentient robots being a threat to humans is real. And certainly, the late physicist Stephen Hawking even expressed concerns that AI could be the number one threat to humans on this planet. So it's definitely something that we have to think about in terms of how technology is changing our lives, our consciousness, the way we see the world, and so forth. And so as much as I've been saying today, we should be critical about technology, and believe me, I think we absolutely have to. At the same time, we shouldn't make unnecessary judgments about technology. And a great example of this is when we went to fully online teaching because of the COVID pandemic. I heard a lot of people saying, like, won't it be great? And I heard faculty and staff and students saying this, equally. Won't it be great to go back to the days when we're teaching in an in-person classroom? And while I think, those are great sentiments because we're still kind of in COVID here, of course, maybe a little less reliant on the Zoom and the technologies that we're using during COVID. But I heard a lot of unnecessary negativities about technology, like you can't have a good class that's online. It's absolutely preposterous to think that you can't teach a great class online. No one ever wants to talk about face-to-face classes that are bad or boring. I had a slew of them in my undergraduate and graduate days where literally I remember one class, 700 students in a lecture hall. It was a Psych 101 class. The professor was lecturing to us in the front of the room. It didn't even make sense attending that class. It was so unmeaningful in terms of an experience. I thought to myself, why am I even here? So we've all had bad face-to-face classes. So we shouldn't just get hung up in technology because it's technology. So as much as we're critical about technology, we shouldn't make unnecessary judgments or assumptions about it, like in the case of DE classes, and assume that technology can't be used in meaningful ways to transform our educational lives. So that is going to be it today, talking about technology in our lives, obstacles and opportunities. I think this was an opportunity to consider some of the issues related to technology technology. Again, you can take my list of tips and ideas, some of my opportunities I've suggested to you for charting out how technology has benefits and disadvantages, and ultimately taking charge of the technology. This is about critically thinking about the technology. It's about thinking about social justice and how to ensure that we have access to technology, whether we're talking about students or our staff or our educators trying to teach our students, and making sure, again, that the environmental impacts and other impacts that are what we call externalities, byproducts of the uses of these technologies that I've been talking about today, that those don't harm us more than the technology does good. So to go back to Heidegger's essay on the instrumental uses of technology, if all this technology results in us destroying the planet, destroying all the other species, destroying our bodies, destroying our ecosystem, and so forth, and all our landscapes, then we have to really ask, what is the value of that technology? It probably doesn't have a value, and that takes us back to this critical use of technology and focusing on expressive and social justice uses of technology as opposed to instrumental uses that Heidegger was super concerned about in his own work. So thanks for listening today to this workshop, to this overview about technology in our lives. I really encourage you to check out all the great resources available for you on technology specific to this grant here from the LTCC Foundation. Thanks for listening, and I'll be back with additional videos in the future.